Genesis chapter 13. Abram leaves and goes out of Egypt, takes his wife Sarah, it says. He also takes Lot with him. And there, once they get into the land is good, but Abram has so much with regards to livestock, cattle, meat, that the land itself, with not only what Abram had, but the text is interesting. It said Abram had much and Lot had some. I mean, that's the way the text reads. It always tickles me every time I study that. But the land itself could really not hold all of the two put together, their goods. And so Abram and Lot came together. They came together in order to figure out, what are we going to do? How are we going to solve this issue? Because the men were beginning to fight and things were not beginning to be settled. Abram says, what are we going to do? And then he makes this statement. He says, we be brethren. That's a fantastic statement when you stop and think about the fact that we are brethren. Not just those of us within inside these walls, and surely we call each other brothers and sisters if we so desire, and we mean it from a standpoint of the spiritual family. But we also understand that all people in the world are brethren, for out of one blood, Paul told the Athenians on Mars Hill, out of one blood, literally one man, God has made all nations for to dwell upon the earth. We're all from one man. No matter who we are, no matter where we live, no matter the color of our skin, no matter, if you will, the cut of our eyes, color of our hair, we're all of one man. And we're all made by one Creator. Understanding then that the Bible defines sin, and we think about, the Bible defines sin as iniquity, it defines sin as transgression, it defines sin as sin. All of those are true. But when we look and try to find a good working definition of sin, besides missing the mark and besides, if you will, iniquity or twisting and perverting the scriptures with regards to transgressions, we understand that sin, as so often been defined by me, is that which contradicts sonship with God and brotherhood with mankind. Some theologians like to call the fact that the Bible teaches about a vertical and a horizontal relationship, and that sin is when either one of those relationships broken. The horizontal relationship is the relationship that we have with others, and the vertical relationship is the relationship that we have with God. So once again, we get back to that which contradicts sonship with God and brotherhood with mankind. Sin. And so it's important that we look at, from time to time, we be reminded how we're to treat one another, how we're to help one another. And our lesson this evening, that's what I want us to key on. How do we help each other? Not just those within this building. How do we help those that we live close to, that we live next door to, across the street from, down the road from? How do we help those individuals? We need to be reminded of that. And as I think about this lesson, as I was studying it all week and then thinking about it again on Friday, making last-minute preparations, and again this afternoon, I thought, we do well. I believe we do well at River Road, but we're always to be reminded. Because we can all do a little bit better. We can all do a little more. But we are to be commended for what we do. And I appreciate the opening prayer, the fact that was stated. But what are some things that we can do to help each other? Well, first of all, be present. Be present. Be there for people. Be an individual that's there. Iron sharpens iron. So a man sharpens his friend's countenance. Proverbs chapter 27 and verse 17. We understand the importance of just being there. You ever been ghosted? maybe I need to define ghosted. Ghosted is when you were left behind. Ghosted is when somebody told you that they were coming and they didn't come. Somebody told you that they'd be there at a particular time and they didn't come at all. Ghosted is when you were called up for a date and the date didn't show up. You ever had that? You ever had people treat you that way, do you that way? The Bible says we need to be people that are present. Paul talked about how God was present for him in 2 Timothy chapter 4. He says in verse 16, at my first offense, no man stood with me, all men forsook me. He said, but, or nevertheless, depending upon the version that you're using, but God stood with me. Paul understood the value and talked about the value of folks being present, didn't he? He talked about God comforts us through the coming of Titus in 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 6. He talks about in 1 Corinthians 16, verses 17 and 18, he talks about two folks by the name of Stephanas and Photychus, and he calls them in verse 18 spirit refreshers. He talks about in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15, he asked and prays that the Lord might have mercy upon the house of Onesiphorus, for he often refreshed me, not being ashamed of my chains. Now, I give you all of those verses, and you're familiar with them all, I'm sure. But I give you all of those verses to remind you that Paul understood the value of people and the value of people being there. The value of people that would help you. The value of people that would be present. Job is a great story. Jim did a fantastic job on Wednesday night that I was with Suzanne in the hospital. Job. But in Job chapter 2, when Job's friends heard of the distress that he was in, notice what it says in Job 2. Each one came from his own place. The friends came from where they were. They came from far away to come and check on their buddy Job. And when they got there, they found a man that evidently was emaciated, a man that was in the middle of grief, and they almost didn't recognize him, but they sat there with him for 7 days. Didn't say a word. They were present. It reminds us of the value of just being present. You know, sometimes I've had people through the years say, I just don't know what to say. I said, can you be there? Yes, that's all you got to do. Matter of fact, it might be best if you don't say anything. We help people. We show up. We're there to help them. We're there in their sorrows. We're there in their grief. We're there in their good times. We're there in their times of celebration, but we're also there in their heartaches and their disappointments. It reminds us so many times, and many times I hear folks, and folks will ask me, well, how so-and-so? And I don't mean to be ugly, but I'll say, well, this is what I understand, or this is what I know from my conversations with them, but you might want to ask them. It's not that I mean to be ugly, but it's just that I think maybe that person would be encouraged, spirit might be refreshed by you asking them. Now, I don't mind telling you what I know if it is information that I can give you that's public. But we're reminded how we want to help people be present. Secondly, communicate with them. Words are important, aren't they? We'll talk about words in a few minutes. But we understand that it's important that we talk to people. We communicate with people. And there's all kinds of different ways to communicate with people. We help people, though, by communication. Don't you like to get an email from somebody? Don't you like to get a text from somebody? Don't you like to get a phone call from somebody? Don't you like for mail to come and there's something with your name on it that you know is not a bill? Aren't you encouraged by that? Aren't you encouraged by just hearing somebody's voice or understanding that they took the time, they thought enough of you, they thought enough of the situation to sit down and pen something, or just simply an email or text that they did maybe as they were running from place to place. We know the value of communication. We study the Tower of Babel. They were going to build that tower all the way to heaven. That's not what God wanted. And God came down and confounded their speech. In other words, they couldn't communicate. They couldn't tell, well, you go over here, you do this, you do that. They couldn't interact with one another. And the tower failed. The project failed because of a lack of communication, a lack of being able to talk to each other. We understand in the Bible the value of communicating with people. It's sort of like one time a man said, he said, I need to find out about George. He said, there's nothing I wouldn't do for him. He said, I would tell him anything and say anything to him. But for the last 20 years, he said, I haven't said a word to him, and he's my next door neighbor. We need to find our neighbors. We need to talk to our neighbors. We need to communicate with people. We help people by communicating with them. Thirdly, by choosing our words carefully. Sometimes we don't have filters. I think I made mention recently of a lady that I know or knew. She's passed away several years ago by the name of Joy. Joy was at times not a joy to be around. Now, at other times, she was great fun. She was kind to Suzanne and I, but she did not have a filter on her mouth. Now, I'm not talking about profanity. I'm talking about she would tell you what she thought, even if it hurt. She didn't care if it hurt. It was what she thought, and she would tell you, I thought it, therefore I'm going to say it. Sometimes what we think doesn't need to be said. You see, death and life are really the power of the tongue. Isn't that what Solomon said in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 24? That the strength of our tongue is the words that we choose. And we can ultimately choose to pull people down, or we can choose to pull people up. And we have to ask ourselves, where do we want to pull them? What do we want to do to them? How do we want to affect them? How do we want to encourage them? Job, in Job 19, getting back to old Job, Job chapter 19, Job told his friends, how long are you going to break my soul with your words? You see, they were of comfort to him when they were present, but their words were not comfort. And he called them on several occasions miserable comforters. It was not their presence that was disturbing. It was not the fact that they had made long journeys. Zophar, Bildad, and it's not that they came from far away. That didn't break his heart. It's the fact that when they finally spoke, what they said was not correct. And they really needed to filter the words that they had said. Paul reminds us that we're to be individuals, that above all things, we're to live peaceably. Words create enemies. The wrong words, that is. The wrong words create strife. The wrong words create factions. The wrong words create division. Sometimes words are really said and meant one way and meant to be well, but are sadly taken the wrong way. You can't help that. If you offered what you thought was a good suggestion, and you offered it in love, and you offered it in kindness, it's not your fault that they mistakenly took it a different way. But it is to say that we as individuals, in choosing our words, need to be sure that we communicate. Had a good little waitress this afternoon, but I noticed one thing about her. I don't know if those with me noticed it. When you placed an order, she repeated it back to you. What you said to her, she said back to you. A lot of them don't do that, and sometimes you don't get what you order. So we need to think about using our words and using the words that we know and using them correctly, but use them wisely. Use them with wisdom. So choose your words, but choose them carefully. Think, as we talked about this morning, think before you respond. Think before you give an answer. What you do, what you say it in order to build up people, in order to, as Paul would talk about in Romans 14, to edify people. See, we're to do all things. Romans 14. Now, Paul was not necessarily talking about communication, but he was talking about this idea of church, how you behave in church. He says, do all things for edification, for edifying. Idea of edifying is the idea of building up, to build up one another. Choose your words so that you build up others next. How about going the extra mile? Whosoever compels you to go with him a mile, Jesus said, Matthew chapter 5, verse 41, go with him too. Now that struck a chord and struck a nerve and struck an instruction in people of that day, of Jesus' day, that may not necessarily strike a chord in our day. We understand the phrase, go the second mile. But in biblical times, the idea of going the second mile was going further than what you had to by law. In other words, as you would go from town, a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, each mile would be marked. And a Roman soldier could come, and you as a citizen, as a Jew maybe, whatever, could grab you and say, take my pack or take my armor. And you were by law, civil law, compelled to take that pack, that armor, whatever, for a mile to the next mark, if you will. And that's all you would take it. Now think about how you would feel. Here's a Roman soldier. He doesn't care what he says to you. He doesn't like you. He's just over you. He grabs you and he says, you're going to take my stuff and you're going to take it this way. And you're thinking, I got to go this way. I don't want to go south. I want to go north. And I've got 2 miles to go or 3 miles to go. And I've got a certain amount of time I need to go in order to get there. And you want me. You couldn't argue. You got the final words in. They were, yes, sir. And you took his stuff that mile. Now imagine that conversation for that mile. What would you be doing? What would you be saying? You'd probably be chewing his arm off, right? Well, that's not what Jesus said. Whoever compels you to go within 1 mile, you go an extra mile. You take it not 1 mile, you take it 2. It's hard to do sometimes with folks, isn't it? It's hard to go that extra little bit for folks. Maybe because they haven't been kind to you. Maybe it's because they haven't been thoughtful to you. Maybe it's because they have been irritants to you. It could be all kinds of reasons. But Jesus says, go that second mile. Be that person that understands the grace that God gave to you and the grace that he continues to give to you. To understand that God is a God of second chances. God is willing to and allows us to make mistakes as long as we're trying. We need that same grace to be extended by us to others. To go the second mile, to go a little bit further, to just one more time or one more thing. To do a little extra. To do a little extra because they are important to us. But then we need to pray for them. I don't know of any greater thing that you can do. I've probably read, no telling how many times, like you, I've read the book of Colossians and studied it, preached out of it. And maybe I've caught this before, but this caught my eye the other day as I was reading it. In Colossians chapter 4 and verse 12, Paul greets Epaphras. And what he says about Epaphras is interesting. He tells the church of Colossae about Epaphras. He says that he is laboring fervently for you in prayer. He's laboring fervently for you in prayer. The idea of fervently is the idea of he is excited, he is on fire, he is doing this with great zeal. Now go back to see what it says. Paul says of Epaphras, he is laboring fervently for you in prayer. What a great thought. What a great admonition. And the reason is, or what his prayers were containing, were the fact that he says that you may stand perfect and complete in the will of God. He says he's praying for you. Well, the Bible often talks about confess your faults one to another, pray one for another that you might be healed. We understand that thought of James 5 that we're praying. Think about Jesus. Jesus prayed for others. In Luke chapter 22, Jesus approached Peter and said, I prayed for you that your faith does not fail. Now that was important. Why? Because that's the verses, and you know them well, that's the verses where Jesus approaches Peter and he says, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has desired you that he may sift you as wheat. But I prayed for you. Think about the number of people Jesus prayed for. Think about who Jesus prayed for. I love Jesus' prayer of John 17. John 17, the book of John, of course, is a great, great book. It's a great account of the life of Jesus, looking at it from the standpoint of faith and building one's faith. In John 17, Jesus is at the end. At the end of his life, he's the last his last day 4. He dies. He prays. He prays for himself. That makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, anybody that knows that they're facing tomorrow or believes that they're facing tomorrow, let's on Jesus knowing what he was facing tomorrow, would pray for themselves. But when you look at the number of, say, verses in John 17 where he prays for himself, they're very small in comparison to who else he prays for. So he prays for himself. And he prays for others. He prays for those at that present time, for what's going on. He prays for them, for their spiritual well-being and for their spiritual health. And then, beginning in verse 20, he prays for you and for me. Prays for those yet to be. Prays for the future. To think that my Lord and my Savior would take the time right before he died to pray for me, it kind of gives me goosebumps. To think that Jesus thought enough of me to pray for him. I've told you before about a good friend of mine. He has mental limitations. But when I worked in the congregation where he attended, on more than one occasion, he would come up to me and he'd put his arm around me. I understand his mental capacity while functioning, sort of not high, super high functioning, but higher functioning. But he'd put his arm around me and his speech would be slurred. Brother Paul, yeah, right for you this week. Keep doing it. I need it. Jesus prayed for him. When I look at the Bible, I also see Paul. I look in such books, and you can really look in just about all of them, but if you look especially in 1 Thessalonians 1, Romans chapter 1, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, Colossians chapter 1, You see Paul praying. Whether it's for the church or for individuals, Paul prayed for others. We tap into the greatest power source available. Get the help for others that they need. What a great blessing and great ministry it is. So, whatever the ministry is that you take up, whether it's the ministry of just being present, whether it's the ministry of communicating with people and talking to them, and while you communicate with them, you choose your words carefully, or you're simply, you go the second mile, you extend grace and mercy towards those that have not treated you well, or you're simply praying for them. Whatever your abilities and opportunities that have come your way, that's how you help people. We live in a world of people. Nashville has over 700,000 people in it. In 2023, Nashville average growth was 86 people a day in 2023. We live in the state of Tennessee where there's over 7 million people. We live in the United States where there's some 342 million people, and we live in a world of 8.5 billion people. We live in a lot of folks. And yet, Genesis 13 still comes to mind. We be brethren. This evening, as you look at your life and you look at where you stand in relation to God, if you need to come to his invitation, won't you come? On together, we stand and sing.